Who are a few people you wouldn't think would do a crime? Let's find out. Starting with number 5. One bad night. Christina Peterson, a judge from Atlanta, got herself caught up in some significant legal and ethical issues that led to her removal from office. She was arrested for allegedly pushing a police officer outside a nightclub, which was just one incident among many that tarnished her reputation. Peterson's troubles began when she was caught up in a heated exchange at a local club where she was accused of getting into a physical altercation with an officer who was trying to manage a disturbance. This led to her arrest and added to her growing list of problems, as she was already under investigation for multiple counts of misconduct. The Georgia Supreme Court found her guilty of systemic incompetence and ultimately removed her from her seat. One case involved a naturalized U.S. citizen, originally from Thailand, who sought to amend her marriage license. The woman wanted to correct the document by including the name of her biological father, but Peterson misinterpreted this action as an attempt to commit fraud against the court. So she sentenced the woman to a maximum of 20 days in jail, which could be reduced to 2 days if the woman paid a $500 fine. So the woman paid the fine and was released after 2 days. However, the court later determined that the woman really was acting in good faith and was simply trying to correct an innocent mistake. Peterson's harsh judgment and subsequent untruthful testimony about the case were key factors in the decision to remove her from the bench. Despite these issues, Peterson continued to find herself in trouble. During her arrest from the cop incident, she refused to cooperate with the police, making the situation worse. She was recorded ranting and making dramatic statements, including claims of false imprisonment and mistreatment. Peterson's legal team and some witnesses argued that she was trying to defend another woman, but the police footage and reports contradicted these claims. The footage showed Peterson interfering with the police officer and refusing to provide her identification, leading to her arrest. The aftermath of her actions was severe. The Georgia Supreme Court not only removed her from the bench, but also barred her from holding any judicial position in Georgia for the next 7 years. This ruling came after a thorough investigation by the Judicial Qualifications Commission, which found her guilty of multiple instances of incompetence and misconduct. It's always kind of weird to hear about judges going crazy, isn't it? Like, there's the saying, sober as a judge, because judges are seen as epitomes of seriousness and sobriety. So you wouldn't expect to hear about one getting physical with a cop. And hey, we're sure it's a stressful job and judges need to unwind just like everyone else, so it's not a huge deal that she ended up making a fool of herself. But the fact that she was also bad at her job makes us feel like she wasn't misjudged. Number 4. Hired help. Terry Thomas from Wyoming thought he had found the perfect match when he met Cynthia Guy online in 2004, back when MySpace was a thing. A single father looking for love, he quickly married Guy after just 7 months of dating. They blended their families and seemed to find happiness. Terry, a successful businessman, and Cynthia, a counselor at the Central Wyoming Counseling Center, appeared to have it all. However, things took a turn as Terry noticed some changes in Cynthia's behavior. She began to display volatile mood swings, and not in a cute, is this just a food thing, are you hungry kind of way. She would be acting fine, then suddenly turn into a demon. The once stable relationship became a roller coaster of emotions. Cynthia's sudden outbursts and unpredictable behavior strained their marriage. Terry thought maybe they were around each other a little too much, so he thought maybe taking a job in Cheyenne, about 2.5 hours away, hoping the distance would help. With that kind of distance though, it sounds more like he was just trying to get away from her. So instead, absence making the heart grow fonder, the distance only made things worse. By 2010, Terry had moved to Cheyenne full-time, and in 2012, he filed for divorce. The divorce was finalized in 2014, with Terry receiving the majority of their real estate assets, while Cynthia got most of the retirement funds. But despite the legal end of their relationship, Cynthia wasn't ready to move on. But not in a, let's fix this kind of way. As it turns out, Cynthia was spiteful and angry. She wasn't ready for anyone to move on. In May of 2014, Cynthia approached one of her patients at the counseling center, asking if they had any connections to the Mexican mafia so she could bump Terry off. The patient, obviously freaking out and now fearing for her own safety, pretended to know someone and reported Cynthia to the authorities. The FBI and local police got involved, and the patient agreed to wear a wire during their next meeting. Cynthia discussed the details of the job with the patient, even suggesting making Terry's passing look like he did it himself. The undercover operation set up a meeting between Cynthia and an agent posing as a button man named Frankie. Cynthia provided $2,000, photos of Terry, and a detailed map of his home. Thinking she had hired Agent 47, Cynthia waited for confirmation. The agent later texted her that he went to the gym and the workout was really easy, meaning the supposed completion of the job. The police then told Cynthia that Terry was gone, and she pretended to be shocked. During her interrogation, Cynthia denied knowing about any sort of plot. However, the taped conversations were undeniable evidence. She was arrested and eventually sentenced to 20 to 25 years in prison. She'll be eligible for parole in 2028. Terry, though shaken by the ordeal, is determined to move forward. He remains cautious but committed to living his life fully. The entire case was featured in the true crime series Murder for Hire, highlighting the shocking reality of Cynthia's plot and Terry's resilience. Number 3. Losing the farm. James Arthur McDonald Jr., a former CNBC financial analyst and CEO, was arrested by the FBI in Port Orchard, Washington. McDonald was accused of defrauding millions from his investors after a failed bet against the U.S. economy. The arrest ends his nearly 3-year run as a fugitive with his extradition to California for trial. McDonald, 52, was the CEO and chief investment officer for 2 Los Angeles financial companies, Hercules Investments LLC and Index Strategies Advisors Inc. His troubles started in early 2020 when he lost tens of millions of dollars of Hercules client money due to a risky short position that bet against the U.S. economy, which means that he was basically borrowing stocks or assets just to sell them, hoping to buy them back at a lower price if the market falls. It's a gamble though, because if the market rises instead, the losses can be hefty, as the stocks would need to be repurchased at a higher price after being sold for a lower one. McDonald thought that the COVID-19 pandemic and the presidential election would lead to a market downturn, but he was wrong, and Hercules lost between $30 million and $40 million. By the end of 2020, investors began complaining about their losses. In January of 2021, McDonald solicited millions more from investors to raise capital for Hercules. He allegedly misrepresented how the funds would be spent and failed to disclose the company's previous massive losses. One particularly notable misuse of funds involved $675,000 from a victim group, with McDonald spending around $174,610 at a Porsche dealership. He also allegedly used $100,000 for a rent house in Arcadia, California, and $6,800 on designer clothing. Yeah, you probably thought this was just going to be a thing about him trying to invest his way out of a hole, right? Yeah, we did too. McDonald was suspected of sending falsified account statements to clients, including one who invested roughly $351,000. When his client later asked for his money to make a down payment on a home, McDonald told him that much of the money had been lost, and he never returned the full investment. After investors began complaining about their losses, McDonald continued to solicit more funds, continuing to mislead investors about their usage. As the financial situation worsened, McDonald failed to appear for a scheduled testimony before the United States Securities and Exchange Commission in late 2021, choosing to run instead and turning him into a fugitive. Despite being on the run, a United States district judge in 2022 found him liable for over $3.8 million, representing the profits from his fraudulent activities. At the time of this video, McDonald is facing multiple charges, including securities fraud and wire fraud. If convicted, McDonald could face up to 20 years in federal prison for each securities fraud and wire fraud count, 10 years for each count related to using investor funds for personal benefit, and 5 years for one investment advisor fraud count. His initial appearance took place in Tacoma, Washington, with his transfer to Los Angeles expected soon. You'd never expect a TV financial analyst to be some crazy fraud guy, right? This guy was a CEO and apparently had enough success that a network wanted him talking about finances to millions of people. The scary thing is that on paper, he was just so credible. Apparently, you really can't trust just anything on CNBC. Number 2. Dr. Fraud. Dr. Megan Labine and Dr. Monica Kihar met while serving on the National Body for the College of Family Physicians of Canada. Initially, their friendship seemed promising. Labine, based in Thunder Bay, and Kihar from Manitoba appeared to share similar career paths and aspirations. But within 8 months, spanning 2019 and 2020, Labine found herself out $160,000. Kihar had convinced her she needed financial help due to a cancer diagnosis. But as it turned out, the diagnosis was fake, and Kihar suddenly disappeared. Kihar initially stopped attending meetings of the National Body for the College of Family Physicians of Canada, where she and Labine initially met and worked together, claiming a breast cancer diagnosis. Labine's attempt to contact her went unanswered until Kihar abruptly reappeared, explaining she had moved to Alberta for a residency program. Kihar's request for money began with $500 and escalated to tens of thousands over several months. Believing she was helping a friend, Labine drew up contracts that Kihar signed. However, when Labine encountered a supposed employer of Kihar's who denied knowing her, it became clear she had been swindled. The realization was devastating. Labine discovered Kihar had also deceived others, prompting her to report the fraud to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Manitoba. Labine's suspicions were further confirmed when she ran into a doctor who was supposedly employing Kihar, only to find out he had never heard of her. It was at this moment that Labine realized Kihar's cancer diagnosis was total baloney. Feeling betrayed and humiliated, Labine hired a private investigator to track Kihar down. It turned out that Kihar's deception extended to her medical colleagues, leading to her expulsion from the University of Manitoba's residency program. The College of Physicians and Surgeons of Manitoba found that Kihar had fabricated evidence of a serious medical condition to gain financial support from colleagues. This resulted in her censure and expulsion, making her unable to practice medicine in Canada. But despite her expulsion, Kihar moved to British Columbia, where she continued to present herself as a doctor anyway. She had established a business in Vancouver promoting some electrical muscle stimulation services or something. The local medical regulatory body allows her to use the title doctor as long as she doesn't imply she's licensed to practice. And that seems like a really weird loophole, since using the title doctor would make the average person assume that the person would be allowed to practice. But whatever. The dumb thing was that she was still acting like she was licensed. Despite complaints and an investigation by Fraser Health Authority, Kihar continued pretending to be licensed and running her business for quite a while, but it did eventually shut down. Labine also remains doubtful about Kihar's intention to repay the money. She confronted Kihar after being contacted by CBC News, but Kihar only mumbled some vague promises, and that was about it. So apparently we can't trust judges, doctors, or TV financial people. Luckily, we still have TikTok influencers as valuable sources of reliable information, right? If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned right here to find out how this guy scammed his own wife. Number 1. The Unprofessionals. Lawrence Michael Handley, a millionaire from Lafayette, Louisiana, tried to have his ex-wife, Shonda Handley, kidnapped. His attempt to have her abducted ended in a dramatic and fatal chase involving the police. One day, Shonda Handley was at home with her daughter and a neighbor when two armed men, Sylvester Bracey and Arsenio Haynes, posing as delivery guys, forced their way in. They handcuffed Shonda and the neighbor, put a hood over Shonda's head, and dragged her into a van. She didn't know it at the time, but these men were hired by her estranged husband, Lawrence Handley. As the kidnappers sped down on the interstate with Shonda in the back, deputies noticed the kidnapped van driving a bit erratically, so they attempted to stop it. Why on earth would they be driving all crazy in the first place is anyone's guess, since the whole idea is to not attract attention. Anyway, the drivers, not wanting to stop, tried to get away by quickly swerving off the road. They ended up driving down some dead-end gravel road and wound up stopped on the banks of a canal. So they ditched the van, with Shonda Handley still inside, and attempted to escape by swimming across the canal, drowning in the process. Luckily, Shonda was rescued by the deputies without any real harm. Lawrence Handley, a former businessman who sold his treatment centers for $21 million, had been battling his own severe substance misuse problems. Apparently, his plan was to take Shonda to his secluded camp in Mississippi for some unknown reason, but his erratic behavior just led to a poorly executed kidnapping plot. Handley was arrested 4 days after the kidnapping when police police tracked him down to a hotel. He had chartered a plane and planned to leave the country, but his attempt to flee was also unsuccessful. It seems like old Lawrence wasn't much of a planner, huh? At the trial, the evidence against Lawrence was overwhelming. Video showed him planning the kidnapping, and he was linked to the rental van and handcuffs used by the kidnappers. Despite this, his lawyer argued that Lawrence was just in a substance-induced psychosis and claimed he didn't intend to harm Shanda. So, totally no big deal. We're not sure what his plans were once he had his ex-wife at his camp in Mississippi, but the camp is pretty remote, and that sounds like horror movie stuff, right? You don't kidnap someone and attempt to have them brought to your isolated camp just to have a deep conversation about the troubles in your relationship. During the trial, Shanda testified about all that she's endured, talking at one point about actually having to hire live-in security for a few months before the kidnapping, hoping that Lawrence would get the maximum sentence, which would have been life in prison. And since the court had more than enough evidence to convict him, Lawrence took a plea deal instead that sentenced him to 35 years. What are the most despicable crimes people will do? Let's find out, starting with number 5, Prince scamming. Shereza Jackson thought she had hit the jackpot when she reconnected with Dorian Wilkerson. Little did she know that reconnecting with him would be the greatest mistake of her life. She had known Wilkerson since high school and remembered him as a good-looking athletic guy who played football and ran track. And while Wilkerson did run something, it turns out it wasn't track. It was a scam that cost Shereza about $1.4 million. When they reconnected, Shereza was a single mother raising 2 daughters with a high-flying career as a regional director at a Fortune 500 company. Wilkerson told her that she wasn't doing badly for himself either, and that he was a medical doctor who also worked at the CDC. Shereza believed Wilkerson was the last missing piece in her life, and she fell completely in love with her Prince Charming. 2 years later, the couple tied the knot in front of 200 guests. The relationship was supposed to open a new chapter of bliss in Shereza's life, but all it ended up doing was running her into over $1 million in debt and handing her a divorce barely 7 years later. The fairy tale turned horror story started simply when Wilkerson messaged her through Facebook. He told her that he had become a doctor at Emory Hospital in Atlanta and an epidemiologist for the CDC. Shereza wasn't doing bad for herself either, and she liked that he was accomplished, driven, and also seemed to have a passion for philanthropy. At the time, Wilkerson lived in Atlanta and Shereza lived in Florida, so they didn't meet up right away. However, a business trip took Shereza to Atlanta, and Wilkerson was on hand to welcome her. He took her to his apartment, and they had a fantastic time getting reacquainted. He showered her with gifts and attention, and she soon fell in love with him. They got married, and her daughters were so smitten by him that they even changed their last names to his. But then, Wilkerson started to show his true colors. A year into their marriage, Wilkerson insisted that Shereza open a cosmetic center that would offer breast augmentation, tummy tucks, and Brazilian butt lifts. Shereza provided around $400,000 in startup capital from her retirement. Wilkerson was in charge of the day-to-day activities of the center, but months later, Shereza discovered that the place was losing money. It was so bad that she had to quit her job and take over operations full-time to stop the place from going out of business. She asked Wilkerson about the missing money from the center, but he always had an excuse that explained things. That was when Shereza started hearing troubling stories from other people. Friends of Wilkerson's ex-wife texted her and told her about how he had scammed his ex for 16 years. Of course, Shereza didn't want to believe the stories, but she had no choice when she saw a text from Wilkerson to his friend saying he no longer wanted to be with her because she was broke. Shereza then found out that Wilkerson had been using her name to get thousands of dollars in loans and had been stealing from her through through her credit card. She also found out that he wasn't a doctor and had actually received a cease and desist letter from the Florida Department of Health. But somehow, that was just the beginning. Further digging revealed that not only was Wilkerson not a doctor, but he was actually a convicted felon who was on probation. Because, why not? Wilkerson had been arrested for fraud in 2002. Then there were the charges for beating someone up in 2007, and the same charges again in 2009. His 2002 arrest was based on charges of extorting and defrauding someone of over $75,000. But somehow, Wilkerson had managed to avoid doing any sort of time behind bars. When Shereza finally confronted him with evidence of his past, he tried to file some nonsense police report about their joint finances to get her arrested, but it didn't work. In the end, Shereza filed for divorce and brought a civil suit against Wilkerson. The suit outlined Wilkerson's pattern of lies and mischief and also alleged that he was unfaithful in his marriage to Shereza. Shereza is trying to rebuild her life and has released a book talking about her experience with Wilkerson called Successful Women Get Played Too. What's crazy about this story is that even though Wilkerson scammed Shereza out of over $1 million, somehow the guy still isn't in jail. She said she thinks he's living with some new girl now, probably up to his same old tricks. Number 4. The fake inheritance. Steve Edward Riley Jr. had his life taken by his girlfriend after she found out he was going to be $30 million richer through an inheritance. She thought poisoning him would allow her to claim the inheritance, which wasn't only just incorrect, but no such inheritance actually existed. Before there was even any talk of an inheritance, Steve had wanted to break up with his girlfriend, Ina Thea Canoyer. Canoyer was apparently a lazy, jobless mooch to Steve, and Steve's patience had worn thin. They both knew their relationship was on its last legs. But once Steve got news of the phantom $30 million inheritance he was about to get, everything changed. Breaking up with his girlfriend now seemed a distant concern that paled in comparison to securing the inheritance. But here's the thing. Steve had no wealthy relatives that he could reasonably expect such an inheritance from. And yet, somehow, he truly believed that it was real all the same. Unfortunately, Steve wasn't the only one thinking of securing the inheritance. Canoyer somehow believed in an obscure law that said long-term girlfriends of deceased men could be seen as their common-law wives, and as such, they would be entitled to inheritance of such deceased persons. To Canoyer, this meant that the only obstacle to obtaining the $30 million for herself was Steve. So, she filled his beer cup with antifreeze, somehow got him to drink it, then didn't call the cops until a day later as Steve became more and more sick. When paramedics eventually arrived, Steve was far too sick to completely recover, and he passed away a day after being admitted to a hospital. When asked what happened, Canoyer said that he'd been drinking beer the day before and had gotten a heat stroke. However, an autopsy proved that Steve hadn't drunk beer the day before. A search of the premises revealed a Windex bottle suspected to contain antifreeze, as well as a beer bottle and a mug that were suspected to contain antifreeze. And thus, Canoyer was arrested. After interrogating Canoyer, she confessed to the police that she thought she would be entitled to Steve's inheritance because she was his common-law wife. Unfortunately for her, the state she lived in didn't recognize that statute, so Steve's passing was for nothing. Perhaps she should have done some light Googling before trying to take someone's life over some outdated law. What makes the case even worse is that investigators later discovered that there was no inheritance and that Steve had probably fallen for a scam. So Canoyer just planned the dumbest and most despicable crime for nothing. Although he can't figure out why Steve thought that he was getting that much money from a rich family member he didn't know of in the first place, why on earth would he tell his girlfriend he was planning to break up with that he had a huge inheritance coming? Number 3. The rogue contractor. Alan Middleton swindled his clients out of more than £500,000 through a comprehensive and complex operation that took authorities months to uncover. Middleton spent the money he got from the fraud on expensive trips to Gibraltar and the Italian Grand Prix. He essentially had the time of his life on other people's dime. Middleton ran a construction company that took steps to get contracts dishonestly. First, he forged a Federation of Master Builders insurance document to suggest he was insured to perform construction jobs. Second, he told his clients that he only worked on one job at a time, but they would later find out that he was working on several projects at the same time and he hardly completed them. Third, Middleton inflated supplier invoices and faked his VAT number, which is like a US tax ID number, all in a bid to extract more money from his clients. Then he made sure he never told his clients that his construction company had been previously bankrupt, which was a crime in itself. And finally, he refused to complete the job jobs he had been paid fully for. But Middleton and his wife, Katie Middleton, who didn't marry Prince William, were just crooks in the office. They were also crooks at home. The Middletons committed mortgage fraud by pretending they weren't in a relationship and that Katie earned a salary of over £100,000. If they hadn't run this part of the fraud, they might not have landed the mortgage because of Middleton's bankruptcies. But the Middletons couldn't get away with their scheming ways forever. They were reported to the authorities and investigations of their business practices began. Alan Middleton tried to go under the radar by changing his name, but it was too late. He was eventually arrested, prosecuted, and jailed for a total of 4 years and 6 months. Katie got a 9-month sentence that was suspended for 18 months. Sadly, Middleton's clients still have to bear the cost of their unfinished construction projects, and their story is hardly unique. Pretty much everyone has a horror story about a nightmare contractor, and the toll on the victims of shoddy home construction and renovation is far more catastrophic than you'd think. So this is a fantastic reminder to make sure and vet anyone doing work on your home. It's just so easy for them to take shortcuts, not to do things to code, or to just abandon the job altogether. Remember, you pay for what you get. Number 2. Like father, like son. Gaston de la Torre, son of notorious Argentinian bank robber Ruben Alberto de la Torre, was arrested in connection to an investigation into a large nose beer distribution network. And yes, nose beers are exactly the type of beer you're thinking of, but less beer-y and more powder-y. Gaston's father, Ruben, is one of Argentina's most dangerous criminals and is infamous for the robbery of the century, which saw $15 million stolen from a bank in Argentina in 2006. Unfortunately for Ruben, and fortunately for the people of Argentina, he didn't get away with his crime and was sentenced to 15 years in prison thanks to his wife. Ruben's son resumed his father's criminal career. Gaston popped up on police radar because of his dealings with a known criminal organization that was looking to transport truckloads of nose beers into Buenos Aires. This led to a sting operation where Gaston was arrested with 8 other guys involved in the business. The police confiscated Gaston's Chevy Cruze, several cell phones, 2 laptops, a tablet, security surveillance cameras, and a notepad. They also confiscated the nose beers that Gaston and his gang were moving. Knowing Gaston's history and who his father was kind of makes you feel a bit bad for the guy. His father was a hardened criminal, and he's found his way into that life as well. Do you think Gaston was always doomed to a life of crime because of his father? Let us know in the comments. Number 1. Their parents didn't matter. Gary Mansell and his second wife Diane worked very hard to defraud Gary's parents, ensuring they spent the last days of their lives in horrifying conditions and pennies to their name. The sad story all began when Fred Mansell, Gary's father, who was 77 years old at the time, suffered a fall and went to a rehabilitation clinic. His wife Enid, at the time, was showing signs of dementia, so a decision to move her into her son's detached home was made. The couple granted their son power of attorney and gave him the responsibility of caring for them and also taking care of their property, which was worth over £250,000. The plan was that Gary and his wife would look after Fred and his wife so they didn't need to go into a care home in their old age. Instead of doing that, Gary and his wife decided to ignore his parents and live large on their dime. First of all, Gary sold his parents' house for £100,000 less than it was worth, which is just so stupid, just so he could get his hands on the cash and spend it on a lavish new extension and kitchen. But instead of using that new kitchen to cook meals for the people that wiped his butt for him when he was little, Gary gave his parents pathetic microwave dinners and let them sit totally isolated in the home extension. The care Fred and Enid got was likely far worse than they would have gotten in a care home. Gary held a good job that paid almost £100,000 a year, and Diane ran a curtain business until it went bankrupt. The pair lived a comfortable life, but it didn't afford them the sort of luxury they thought they were entitled to. So when Gary's parents' fortune and power of attorney dropped in his lap, he splurged. The couple had steak dinners, flew in first-class cabins, went on expensive trips to Jamaica and Cape Verde, and even bought a brand new Land Rover. The couple also had expensive stays in hotels and spent money on designer bags and scents. Diane spent over £9,000 on cosmetic work as well. While all of this happened, end. Fred and his wife Enid were almost completely isolated at home. During their 3.5-year stay with Gary, they only went on vacation once to Wales, where they barely left the hotel. Sadly, Enid passed away, and Fred finally realized what his only son had been doing with his money. The knowledge broke him so much that he said he no longer wanted to live. Social workers got involved, and Fred had to be moved into a care home while Gary and his wife faced the music. The couple had their day in court, and a disgusted judge sentenced both of them to prison for 6 years. The judge said that they had both carried out the most despicable display of greed and vanity he had ever seen, just so that they could live the life of their dreams. It's hard to disagree with that. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you'd rather have: a marriage to anyone you pick that lasts forever, or being a forever bachelor or bachelorette, being irresistible to whomever you choose.